What are some ways you can use creative thinking strategies to increase productive fluency? Sarah Davila is helping us walk through her approaches to helping students on this episode of the DIESOL Podcast. Welcome to the DIESOL Podcast, where we focus on developing innovation in English as a second language. I can't get any of my words out right, but here we are today. I'm Brent Warner, professor of ESL at Irvine Valley College, and I'm here with the wonderful Ixchell Reyes, award-winning educator in innovation, professional development, all the things. Ixchell, how are you today?
I'm doing well, fighting allergies because of spring and rain.
Oh, yeah.
How about you?
I am doing okay. No allergies to speak of as of yet, but we're getting close to the end of the semester here, so I'm kind of looking forward to summer and having a little time to focus on some of my own projects too. And we are here with the wonderful, excellent Sarah. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me on the DIESOL podcast. And I am super excited to talk to you about creative thinking and anything else that comes up.
Thank you. So, Sarah, we've talked about having you on the show for a while. It feels like a couple of years, a year and a half, maybe?
Yeah, at least a year, because I remember you promising.
So, Sarah, bear with me as I present your bio for those who may not know, although you're a well-known person in the field. So here we go, though. Sarah Davila is an internationally recognized consultant specializing in English language education, curriculum innovation, and educational technology. A former classroom teacher, Sarah has supported national language policy reforms, built teacher training systems, and designed comprehensive assessment frameworks for clients ranging from ministries of education to global publishers. As the founder of Educating Her World, Sarah brings a systems-level perspective to solving urgent challenges in language learning, focusing on upskilling educators, advancing 21st century pedagogies, and improving learning outcomes. And she's based in Chicago and working worldwide.
Yay!
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, but every time I talk to you, you're like, "Oh, I'm doing this huge thing, and I'm changing the entire country of Panama's language stuff." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well,
just national curriculum reform for your weekend. What are you doing?"
Yeah. So how are you doing first?
It's good. I mean, I am with Ixchell here. It's spring in Chicago, so I also have the allergy season going on. We've got like double red warnings every single day with the pollen, so it's nice to see everything in bloom. But otherwise, busy. Continuing to do a lot of work on developing new programs, putting new curriculum out there, and of course, just kind of thinking through some of the fun challenges that are going on in education right now. Because in English language, especially, the sector is just changing really, really rapidly. What we're doing inside of the classroom, I think, is evolving in ways that we haven't really seen since maybe the mid 2000s, when communicative language teaching was really revolutionizing what we were doing in English. So happy to be here, happy to be working, and really happy to be supporting a lot of really interesting institutions and organizations as they're helping to navigate these changes globally. Yeah.
Very cool.
Tons of stuff going on, but today we're talking about creativity, lots of creative thinking, all these kinds of things. And Ixchell, I know you're going to kick us off.
Yeah, so we often talk about creativity and creative thinking, but what is creative thinking as a technique, and how is that different just from creativity alone?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. I kind of fell down this rabbit hole of creative thinking techniques and creative thinking as a strategy back in 2010 when I was learning more about 21st century learning frameworks. So I think most of us at this point have been in some kind of webinar or a professional development session where we've learned about the 4 C's, right? So we know that the 4 C's of 21st century learning, these are the learning skills, are communication, critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration. And so creativity is a part of a learning skill. And so we think, students are creative. However, if you kind of go a little bit further back in the history of education and educational science, creativity is a really interesting skill. Many years, I mean, and still there's a huge bias to creativity and actually creating something meaningful and powerful, that's a genius. That's not something everybody has. That might be something innate to some people, but not everyone is going to have that ability to just make something that's amazing and magical. But what's really interesting is there was some research that was done, and this was one of the kind of the fathers of creative thinking is Edward de Bono, and he wrote a book back in the 1950s that was updated in the 70s called Lateral Thinking. And it posits sort of a new way to think about creativity, and not that it's something that's genius. It's not inherent. You don't have to be born as a creative person. These are characteristics and qualities that can actually be taught and learned. And so he came up with this series of creative thinking strategies, essentially, that allow us to create frameworks that we can bring into a variety of different situations to foster creative thinking. And so it's a bit more disciplined. It's not just a random thing. It's not just asking students to be creative, but it's actually providing a bit of a scaffold, a structure, and a framework to allow creativity and creation to happen. And so when I started looking at that, I was like, wow, that's interesting just broadly as how we come up with ideas and create innovations. But then if I think about that from a language teaching perspective, it actually breaks through some of the challenges that we have sometimes when we're teaching language, especially at the lower levels, but even at the higher levels, where the learning can sometimes feel a bit dull, like we're repeating the same content over and over again, or it's where we want to get to more productivity, but we find that the students sort of fall off after a few minutes, or that lack of really getting to internalization and fluencies. That's a bit how I ended up there and thinking about creative thinking techniques. And that's a bit of how this is different from just being creative, but it's really scaffolding creativity.
So if I guess I'm thinking of I train teachers, so my pre-service teachers would want to know, well, what's a concrete example of what that looks like? What does it look
Right.
like if I'm
Right? So it's like, how do you bring that to life in the classroom? Like, what are you doing here? So I'm going to start with kind of a very basic, and there are multiple different techniques. And because I'm an overachieving educator, I have a website. So if you Google Sarah Davila, you'll find me very quickly. It's saradavila.com is the website. And this is a labor of love website. This is not a promotion. I have been hosting this website now for over 20 years, and it's kind of a dumping ground for any activity that I've ever made that's not under copyright by somebody. So it's like if I created it, I throw it online. Good, bad, I don't care. And when I first started working with creative thinking techniques, I threw a bunch of them up on this website. And I'm going to start off with one of my favorite ones. And it's going to seem very obvious when you see it, but it's a great example. So we're going to try sharing my screen. We'll see how it goes.
Wonderful for the YouTube fans. A little trickier for the podcast listeners, but we'll get it going.
So we're going to make this a little bit bigger. So what you're seeing here, so one of my favorite creative thinking techniques is actually called reverse brainstorming. Most of us know brainstorming, right? I toss out a topic like food. What are some foods that you like? We have our students do a brainstorm. We elicit a lot of different types of food from our students. And, from there, we might do some activities like how do you make the food? What are the ingredients of the food? We can really specialize that. So with a creative thinking, so think about the reverse of that. So with reverse brainstorming, and this is a little example activity that I have on the screen here. So in this activity, it's like, okay, so what are some foods that you might like to cook? And so the first example I have here is pizza. I worked with middle schoolers for a number of years. Pizza is always the top of the list of favorite foods. So I have that up there.
Top of the
And
list
then
for me too, so way past the middle school.
who doesn't love pizza? So pizza, easy. Most people like pizza. That's an easy one. Most people will cook it. Now, what's interesting is like, great, you like to cook pizza, but what are some ways that you would not? What are some things you would not do if you were going to make a pizza? So rather than just think straightforward, all right, if I'm making a pizza, these are the ingredients. This is, step one, step two, step three. We're actually challenging our student to think a little bit differently. So for example, well, would you use frozen pizza dough? Absolutely not. Like I would never do that. So that's a reverse brainstorm. What are some things that we wouldn't do? Maybe you would not use a canned vegetable if you're making your pizza. So that might be something we list as a reverse of what you would typically do. Another one is like, would you use pre-shredded cheese or would you prefer to shred your own cheese? So it's like if you would never use a bag of pre-shredded cheese, this would be an example. Would you put ham and pineapple on your pizza, or is that something you would never do? It's really giving you this opportunity to kind of think about something that, oh, I love that. But what are the things that might happen in there that would change my position that I want to be very clear are things that would have a negative impact on this thing that I'm talking about. And you can do this for literally almost everything. It's like, well, I love the color red, except if I'm wearing a red dress and I have purple shoes, I would never do that. Like it's getting it's getting the learner really an opportunity to really expand on something. So you're not simply making a single statement, but you're actually thinking through that statement with some depth. Because in almost any situation, I might be able to say I like something. However, there may always be some caveats or some little things in there that would actually turn that like to dislike very quickly. And getting your students to talk about that creates all kinds of new conversations because they start thinking of these nightmare situations they've never thought of before. Like, what if we put ketchup on pizza? I lived in Korea for 10 years, and let me tell you something. I have a lot of opinions about that, but in Korea, you learn to like ketchup on your pizza because that is something that's going to happen. So that's kind of a quick example of the strategies. It's once you understand what the strategies are, they're extremely simple to implement. And this is one of my favorite little scaffolds, is just doing it as a chart exercise. And then what I'll have my students do here is obviously they'll list several foods. And you can do this in several ways. You could have students do it as a partner exercise. You could have students do it individually. Then they get together and share. But essentially, the purpose of the creative thinking strategy is to help unbox more opportunities with language so that if you're at an A1 level or if you're at a C1 level, you're really expanding that conversation to go far beyond just a simple statement to complete a response to a question or to an answer.
I like it too. So I'm thinking about this because one thing that happens a lot with, these types of questions, food questions, whatever else it is like students get used to the same thing over and over again, right? It's like, oh, I know how to say the foods that I like and why I like them, right? And so it's kind of, they end up in different classes having those same conversations. You're taking the same topic that they already understand, but spinning it in a way that actually forces them to start thinking through, how different ways to talk about it. And it serves a second purpose too with the pineapple and Canadian bacon, is you can find out which of your students are sociopaths or not, and so that's always a good thing too.
People have very strong opinions to this day about ham and pineapple on pizza.
I'm thinking of how
Ixchell, if you
this
didn't know
could,
that.
I was just going to say how this changes up any grammar activity that asks students to use I would or I wouldn't, because they're just canned sentences. And a lot of the
Exactly.
times you end up with the affirmative, but it's harder to produce the negative form. And so
Absolutely.
I can already see this happening with the pineapple.
Right? No, and it's like with reverse brainstorming, it's really magical in the classroom because once students start thinking about like negative situations, they can really come up with a lot of different, like it gets very creative very, very quickly. And they'll throw in things like, I love pizza unless there's dog hair on it. And I'm like, where did the dog hair come from? But it's and that is the creativity part of it. It's just like I think these things will suddenly come forward that you hadn't even considered, and it really suddenly breaks down a lot of the rigidity sometimes that we do see when we're teaching. So that was what got me into it, and building some of the strategies around it has been a lot of fun, and just helping other educators understand how can we bring that together. So that's a quick example, and all of these worksheets, by the way, are available on my website. You can download them very quickly as a package and play around. And I do have detailed lesson plans for each of the different strategies. So it's just one lesson plan for strategy. So if you open up reverse brainstorming, you'll get the whole piece, but then you can apply it to any of the worksheets I've created. And then of course, go off and create your own. I've really created these to be templates for educators to use and to just pick up and run with. So I like to say I'm a no budget, low budget teacher. So almost all of these techniques can be done with literally just your students and a pencil and paper if that's all you've got in the classroom. So it's designed to be very flexible.
Well, I think we'll oops.
Sorry, Brent. I was going to say all those templates are so generous because, again, many places, especially overseas, they don't have a lot of tech. So we'll make sure that they're accessible in the show notes so they can get all
Yeah.
the things.
Well,
Fantastic.
let's talk about one more that's pretty quickly accessible on paper, which is the idea box. I know you've talked about that, and especially working with lower
I
level
love it.
students, and it's pretty practical. So, can we talk about that one afterwards? We'll talk a little bit more about some of your ideas around AI and creativity, but a little bit more of just like let's get it with we don't necessarily have to have all the tech tools. So, share a little bit about the idea box.
Sure. So with the idea box, it's an interesting creative thinking technique. So reverse brainstorming is again that technique from Bono is just like, well, when you're brainstorming ideas, oh, think about the opposite too. Don't just think about the positive, but think about the negatives because that can help you find ideas you wouldn't discover. With idea box, it's sort of bringing the same thing. It's like, all right, we're trying to generate. A lot of these techniques essentially include a brainstorming action. So, all right, what are some ideas that you have around X, and then you might make a list. But with idea box, what you want to do is then add a series of questions to expand upon that idea. And I'm just going to show you. I am a show and tell teacher, so it is a
Yeah,
lot
please.
easier for me if I can show. And if YouTube likes the show, that's even better. Because I like a good YouTube show. All right, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so we can see it on the screen, hopefully. So here's again, the first part of this is very, very simple. The very first thing that I might do with my students here, again, you'll see I'm using the chart as my structure frame here because charts are just very easy to explain and use to organize.
So you've got hobby, where, how, and why. Just
Exactly.
on the
So
table there.
that's
Okay.
that expansion there. So the first column, hobby, that's the brainstorming piece, right? So let's make a list of a lot of hobbies that you do, that you like to do, or maybe hobbies that you're aware of, that you know about. And so that might be part one of my activity. Again, my students could doing this as an individual. If I have a very small class, I'd have my students do it individually, and then we would pair up. If I have a large class, I might have my groups do this. And then what I'll do is I'll have group one and group two actually get together and present their ideas and compare, or I'll do a jigsaw where I'll have different students from different groups kind of get together and share out what their groups came from. So these are very expansive depending on the type of classroom you work with. So step one is let's get the hobbies out. And then the idea box portion here is now expand upon that idea. If painting is a hobby, then where would you paint? How do you paint? Like, why do you paint? So, for example, here, my student says painting. Where do I paint? I paint in my room. How do you paint? I learned to paint in school. So their idea for how they paint is slightly different from like the construct of how. They're saying, oh, well, I know how to paint because I learned to do that in school. They're interpreting that question there. Or here I have, how did you start? And then finally, like, how do you keep doing it? I enjoy being able to paint my dreams. So that's like my motivation, or that's what keeps me going. So if I have students, like a very common one is like when you say hobby, is the first thing you'll see is soccer. Again, I worked in Korea for a number of years. So if soccer is a
Mm-hmm.
hobby, it's like no matter what you do, it's going to come up. It's like, well, where? Where do you play soccer? Oh, and then they're thinking, well, I play soccer here. I'm like, how did you learn to play soccer? Oh, I haven't thought about that before. I say soccer. If you ask me what's the hobby, my answer is soccer. The sentence is complete. The instruction is complete. The activity is complete. But now with the idea box, you actually have to go a little bit deeper into it. It's not enough for you to just be able to state that this is your hobby. We actually have to expand on that and answer some additional questions. So one of the other ways you can expand on this, I'm sure many of us have done the sort of interview, find someone who, this really unboxes that find someone who is. It's like find someone who learned how to play soccer from a parent, find someone who taught themselves soccer, find someone who learned how to play soccer from watching TV. So now you really got your students thinking about like the entire art of what that hobby is, what it means to them, how they created that. That then you can use to just have your students share from this worksheet, or even expand that off into other types of activities to really engage the depth and the breadth of communication there. So hobbies is one of these, but I have multiples of these for different types of ideas that you can kind of riff on. And then again, you'll see the scaffold there as well.
Love it. So you had talked about, so this is great, and I was thinking you were talking about the find someone who thing too, because it's like a lot of times that ends up being kind of a yes no question, and then just fill in, jump to the next person, try to find the next person right away. And so I like the idea that you might say, okay, no, you're going to talk to someone for 90 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever it is, and then you're going to try to expand as many of these questions as you can in this time, right? Maybe you can get to the where, maybe you can get to the how, maybe you can get to the why, right? But you
Right.
would say like follow up with those, so it's not just yes no questions, and then that can push the students to go a little bit further through everything as well.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot.
And you'll see on a lot of these activities, I have included, so it's like there's kind of a step one and step two. Step one is doing the brainstorming, the ideation, and then at the bottom, I have additional share language for that interaction. So they can either be doing that with, again, with a partner, if I have a small class, maybe one or two partners, or if I have a large class, it can be a full group mingle or, get as many students as you can, but you can really expand these very, very quickly.
Nice. Love it.
This is so cool. I think we had just talked about not doing the same cringy activities in the same way. And this is another cool way to do it.
Well, the thing I like about it too is it's like it doesn't take a lot to figure out a way to shift the perspective on it, right?
Right. No, it's really, you start from brainstorming, but it's literally just kind of adding a spin on that brainstorming, and that allows us to go further. There are so many ways to do brainstorming. I'm sure you've seen things like four corners brainstorming, which these are graphic organizers, or mind mapping. But you always, when you start with that type of brainstorming, it always tends to be very literal. Like you start with a point, and then next point, next point, next point. What we don't realize as educators is that process of like point A, and then point A logically follows to B, followed by C, followed by D. That is critical thinking. That is process thinking, where we're actually creating a logical construct and we're moving from point A to a point B to point C to point D. So what's interesting about these creative thinking strategies for brainstorming is the goal here is not to be logical, but to be lateral. To actually shift how we're thinking so that we're moving in a slightly different direction to create a larger repository of potential ideas. And so that's kind of a significant way to do that. And again, it really unboxes a lot. And if you don't mind, I'm going to steal things a little bit and take you into a third one, because this was the one that I love doing. It blows my mind the first time I did it. And it what this does is it brings, say, the kinesthetic play, visual. It's very, very creative. Again, you can do this with just pencils, papers, crayons, if that's all you have. But if you, like me as a teacher, if you go to every single conference, whenever you go to a conference, I love the expo hall. Walk through the expo hall. Whoever is giving away Post-it notes, go the last day of the expo hall and just fill your bag with Post-it notes. I used to do this at DIESOL. I do it at DIESOL. So it'd have like massive quantities of Post-it notes. And then you can do one of my favorite creative thinking techniques. And I'll just put this up on the screen. I'm getting very good at this, hopefully, as this management. I'll make this one bigger. So you can kind of see this. So Lotus Blossom, this is, again, these are the Bono creative thinking techniques. And I'm using one. This is a great one focused on Korea. So we start off with the circle. The circle is sort of the center of our Lotus Blossom. And we might be talking about countries and customs. And so I start off here with the example, Korea. Korea is a country. Now, with that circle, what the very first thing that I would want to do is maybe have my students brainstorm several countries. So we would have Post-it notes for Japan, China, Germany, Ghana. We could do Argentina. We could have Mexico. We could have Panama. So of multiple different countries in here. Now, once we have the countries, that's great. Now that we know about countries, we want to have some customs. So we can start off brainstorming some customs. So in Korea, very true in Korea, one of the important customs here is you do not put your chopsticks in rice. It's like a common, you can tell someone is new to Korea when you see those chopsticks in rice. It's right there. And then so that's kind of the part here is like we'd say, okay, so what are some cultures? And I love doing don't. So in Korea, you would not put chopsticks in rice, but in Korea, you would bow if you're saying hello to someone. So you kind of have both a positive and a negative. And then on top of that, this is the next layer of my Lotus Blossom, the why. Like, what do I need to know about that? Why is that the rule? Why is that something that you need to do? So now imagine, you can see here on the screen, like I have kind of my first circle, then I have my little Post-it note, then don't put chopsticks in rice. That would be my second Post-it note. Then this third, that would be a Post-it note. And if you actually have this in physical reality, these little Post-it notes start to flip up like flower petals. And when you do this with all of the countries, and then you add in all of the cultural pieces, and then you add in all of the knowledge, you finish with this beautiful Lotus Blossom. And then you can pick that up and go around, and one of your partners or one of your peers points to a country, and then you use the lotus blossom to answer questions. What country are we talking about? Korea. What is something you don't do in Korea? In Korea, you don't put chopsticks in rice. Why? Because that would be disrespectful to your elders. What is something you do do in Korea? And now imagine the conversations you're suddenly having in your classroom. Like you're really expanding that language beyond anything that you've ever done before. I have this creative thinking, like I have this for the smallest things, like what's your favorite, color, all the way out to something as complex as cultures and traditions. And it's just magical to watch this happen. And again, if you don't have post-it notes, you can have students use different colored pencils and just draw boxes and bring it forward. But when you're finished, you have this beautiful mosaic flower circle of communication that is just so much fun to do. So this is again another one of those creative thinking things that just unboxes that language in the classroom. I'll stop soapboxing
Yeah,
that.
no, I love it. I
I
will.
am going to try this one. This is cool because when you're teaching writing, you can now, even if it's a fluency activity, now you have scaffolded all of the ideas so that they're ready to be put into a paragraph that isn't a headache inducing paragraph for them, and they'll
Yeah,
be
you can even,
better
I
connected to
love
it.
that.
So more likely to actually go back and edit and feel proud of it at the end.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You can mix and match, share. There's so much. Go ahead, Bren.
Well, I was just thinking too, like, you mentioned the part about like the sticky notes, like you can do it on any modality, but I like that that little physical part of the curl up, right? Like, because it becomes a tactile learning experience at the same time, and so you can really see it kind of growing out of the page physically. Like, it sounds silly, but you kind of recognize that that actually has a totally different impact on people than flat writing or whatever else it is, right? And so
Yeah.
okay, we're already over time, but I have to ask a question about AI.
We
We
have
can't
to.
we can't not do it. Sarah, you're running most of the AI things for TESOL these days, which is
Yes.
wonderful. Always excited to see that going on. And I know that you have some thoughts around, like, are we being creative with AI? Are we developing creative thinking around it, or are we just letting it guide us in ways that maybe we wouldn't have chosen for ourselves? So I know you have some thoughts on that, if you
Yeah.
don't mind sharing.
No, it's actually it makes a lot of sense after what we've just talked about, right? It's like when we think about brainstorming, we often tend to do that process thinking, which is that critical thinking process. The same is often true with AI, and we don't think about this. I listen to a lot of AI experts, and I'll tell you, working with AI is a great way to ideate and brainstorm, except that you have to always remember, and this is something I really emphasize in the TESOL courses that I teach about AI. These models have been trained on the entirety, the depths and breadth of available human wisdom. Anything that we have captured in audio or visual or text format has been used to train these models. So when you're ideating with AI, you might see a lot of ideas that you have never thought of before, but it doesn't mean that these have never been thought of before. Like in a lot of ways that we're just tapping into creativity from other people maybe we haven't met. And that is actually the trap of being creative with AI. We're starting to see some very early research come out from many of our research partners who are looking at the impact of this in education. And what they are finding is that when you ask people to brainstorm with AI, the number of ideas that they come up with is a very smaller set of ideas, and they're less original and less unique. They tend to see a lot of the same thing, the same creative ideas coming out of these brainstorming sessions with AI because they're being driven by all of that training and information. So it's not that you can't brainstorm with AI. It's just again, you have to push yourself to really ask, is this being creative, or is this just taking the question that I've given and using a critical thinking process to give me ideas that are new to me but are not necessarily new. So I think that for us as educators, when we're using these tools to be creative, it is useful to stop and say, well, like, what would the opposite of this look like? Doing some techniques and some strategies to really helping us push ourselves to make sure that we're not allowing the AI as a tool to actually limit our own abilities to innovate. Because the one thing that we do know about human beings is you give us enough time and we will be far more creative than any machine can ever summarize for us. And so I think that's always the thing to keep in mind when we're working with these tools.
And that is a good note to wrap up on.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are going to run out of time here. A good time. Thank you so much, Sarah. This is awesome. Let's jump out. Let's dive out.
Right. It is time for our fun finds. And I have found Ground News app. Brent, you've heard of it before, I think.
Yeah.
A Ground News app. It's a news app that compares how different news outlets cover the same story across the political spectrum. So that way when you see what's being shown to you on your feed versus reported by and what the headlines are. And so I guess, so that you're not stuck with one biased version and go to another biased version. So the free version is good enough, I think.
Yeah.
So check it.
Definitely worth checking out. And then I've seen Ground News on like YouTube channels too. So if people want to get it, you can get a discount code from somewhere on YouTube. Not from us.
It's worth it. I've been thinking it's worth investing, especially nowadays since there's a backlash against a lot of the stuff that's out there. So I'm
All right.
considering it.
Well, speaking of investing in more balanced technology that's not so pushing everything one direction or another, if you're talking about leaving Google as your search engine, may I strongly, very, very strongly, can I recommend Kagi. It is a search engine that is like Google was about 4 or 5 years ago. It was wonderful. There is no ads, no tracking of anything. It puts together the information for you. You can search the small web on there if you know about that stuff. You can focus in. You can build all these little filters into your searches. Now, the one thing is it is not free. And so I got to test, when you sign up for it, you can test and get like 100 free searches or whatever with it. And I was just blown like instantly. The quality of the searches there, because there's no ads, right? I just did a Google search yesterday and literally a page and a half of scrolling was all advertisements before anything came through, right? So anyways, all that's gone. It's not cheap, $10 a month or 10% off for a year, whatever. But I'm just thinking, I'm Google's product. It's not the other way around when I'm searching on Google these days. So it's just trash. Kagi, really outstanding. No tracking of you, no ads inside of there. High quality results coming through on every single search. Options on the side for like some little AI integrations if you want them, but it's not prioritizing that in the way that Google searches. So if you're interested in it is like a real heart relieving benefit of like having a nice search. I felt my body relax when I got a good search out of it. So anyways, Kagi is my high recommendation, even just to explore and see if it's a possibility for you. It's Kagi and it is worth every penny for me. Sarah, do you have any fun finds for us?
Sure, I'm going to be shameless self-promotion.
Yeah.
Here's my shameless self-promotion. My fun find. If you haven't already found this, do check out the website. This is my resource library, as I like to say. And I want to point out, I have organized this to be very accessible to teachers. In fact, there's a little library. I'm on the wrong screen, so I'll go back to the right one. There's a library where you can actually search through the library.
Wow.
I have close to 500 or 600 activities and lesson plans on the site. These are all free to download. And I want to mention, if you are on a mobile device, I've actually built the site so that when you're on mobile, it does not automatically load any of the content. All of the PDFs load automatically on a laptop. But I know a lot of people around the world are doing this work sometimes on their phone after school with limited data connections and also just limited access where you're paying a lot more for that data. So you think very carefully. So if you are on a mobile device and you're downloading, you can very explicitly pick what you want, and it won't eat up all of your bandwidth just to go through and browse around. So shameless plug for me. If you haven't already found it, it's a good fun find. It's totally free and it's available on the internet.
Thank you for thinking into that about affordability.
Yeah. No, it's something people don't think about, but I realized I was looking at where my traffic comes from. So many people are on mobile. I'm like, I want to make the mobile data as light as possible so that it's easy and accessible everywhere.
Love it. All right.
Okay, for the show notes and other episodes, check out diesel.org/137. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram at DieselPod. You can still find Brent.
Yeah, I'm still
I'm
mostly on LinkedIn at Brent G. Warner, occasionally other places, but not so often. Ixchell, how about you?
You can still find me on Instagram at Ixie_Pixie_. That's IXY_PIXY, second underscore.
And
Sarah, where
Sarah,
can they find you?
Well, if you don't find me at my website, saradavila.com, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn as Sarah Davila. I'm one woman. I have one social media. I couldn't do it anymore with like everything. I used to have stuff everywhere, but these days LinkedIn is where you primarily find me active. Yeah.
what's up? All right. Thanks, everybody, so much for joining us. We appreciate your time, and please go check out Sarah's work. There's a lot more. This is just a tip of the iceberg conversation, so go explore it
I'll be back.
She's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll be back. You'll be back for sure. We got a lot more to talk about. So awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, everybody. We'll take care and see you next time around.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.